The scarred rancher took her in, and she gave him all she had left. The hot sun hung low in the sky, casting long shadows over the dusty roads that led to the ranch. The land was wide and empty, stretching far into the horizon with nothing but the occasional tree and the soft sound of the wind brushing against dry grass. It was the kind of place that felt both peaceful and lonely at the same time, a place where the quiet could either soothe a troubled heart or make it ache. At the edge of this vast land stood the ranch, sturdy but worn, a house of rough wood and stone that had weathered many years of storms and harsh seasons. The rancher stood outside, leaning against the wooden fence, his gaze sweeping over the fields. His face was marked with scars, pale lines that told stories he rarely spoke of. They were reminders of fights he had survived, accidents he had endured, and dangers he had faced alone. His hands, strong and calloused, rested on the fence post, fingers tracing the grooves in the wood as if grounding himself to the earth. Despite the toughness in his appearance, there was a quiet gentleness in the way he observed the land, as if he had a deep respect for the life he had built here. It was during this quiet moment that he noticed movement in the distance. At first, it was only a small figure walking along the road, stumbling slightly as though the journey had been long and difficult. The rancher's instincts kicked in immediately. He knew from years of living in these remote lands that travelers could be lost, desperate, or dangerous. Still, there was something about this figure that drew his attention, a hesitancy, a fragility that spoke of someone carrying more than just physical weariness. As she came closer, the rancher could see that she was young, but her eyes held a depth that seemed older than her years. They were wary eyes, scanning her surroundings as if expecting danger at every step. Her clothes were worn and dusty, and she carried a small bag, slung loosely over her shoulder, which looked like it had been packed in a hurry. Her hair was tangled from the wind, strands clinging to her cheeks, but there was a quiet strength in the way she walked, each step deliberate, careful. She looked like someone who had been running for a long time, though from what the rancher could not tell. The rancher's voice broke the silence. "You need water." It was not a question he often asked strangers, but something about her made it feel necessary. She stopped in her tracks, startled by the sound, and then slowly nodded. Her voice came out in a soft whisper, rough from exhaustion. "Yes, please." He straightened and walked toward the house, gesturing for her to follow. The porch creaked under his boots, the familiar sound comforting to him, and he opened the door for her. Inside, the house smelled of wood smoke and hay, a mixture that was homely but rough, like the life he had made for himself. The walls were decorated with photographs and tools, each item telling a story of hard work and years spent alone on the land. The woman's eyes scanned the room, and for a moment she seemed unsure whether she was safe. Her hands clutched her bag tightly, as if letting go of it might release some of the fear she carried inside. The rancher noticed but said nothing. Instead, he went to the kitchen and filled a cup with water, handing it to her without meeting her eyes. "Drink," he said simply. She took the cup with trembling hands and drank slowly, savoring each sip as though it were the first water she had tasted in days. He watched her quietly, noting the way her shoulders sagged once she felt a little relief. There was no hurry in his movements, no pressure, only the slow rhythm of someone who had learned patience through solitude. After a few minutes she spoke, her voice barely above a whisper. I don't have anywhere else to go." The rancher studied her face, searching for any sign of dishonesty, but all he saw was exhaustion and pain. He knew what it was to carry burdens alone, to move through the world with scars no one could see. Something in him softened, though he did not show it. He nodded once, a small gesture that carried a lot of meaning. "You can stay, for now." Her eyes widened slightly, a mix of surprise and gratitude. She tried to say something, but the words caught in her throat. Instead, she simply nodded, letting herself believe, even for a moment, that she might be safe here. Over the next hour, he guided her through the ranch, showing her where she could rest, where she could eat, and where the animals were kept. He did not ask for her story, did not press her for explanations. He had learned that people often revealed their truths in their own time, not when forced. Still, there were small gestures that spoke volumes. The way she flinched at sudden movements, the way she smiled faintly when she saw the horses, the way she paused by the window to watch the sun set over the fields. By evening, a fire was burning in the hearth, casting a warm glow over the room. The rancher sat in a chair nearby, watching her as she cleaned up the dishes they had used for a simple dinner. She moved carefully, almost ritualistically, as if keeping order around her helped keep chaos at bay. He could see the tension in her hands, the way her fingers trembled slightly when she handled a plate, and he felt an urge to reach out, to offer more comfort than words could provide. "Sleep here tonight," he said eventually, breaking the quiet that had settled over the room. "The guest room is ready," she hesitated, glancing toward the door, then back at him. "I don't want to be a burden." "You're not," he said firmly. "Everyone needs a place to rest sometimes." That simple statement seemed to settle something inside her. She gave a small nod and followed him to the room, setting her bag gently on the floor. The room was modest but clean, with a bed covered in a patchwork quilt, a small dresser, and a window that looked out over the fields. She stood for a moment, taking it all in, and then sank onto the bed, letting out a breath she had been holding for who knew how long. The rancher stood at the doorway for a moment, unsure whether to leave or stay. There was an unspoken understanding between them, a fragile trust that had begun to form. He had seen many people come and go in his life, some leaving pain, some leaving nothing at all. But something about her made him want to offer more than just shelter. He wanted to see her heal, even if he could not say why. As he turned to leave, she called softly, "Thank you." He paused at the door, hearing the genuine tone in her voice, and nodded. "Get some rest. Tomorrow is a new day." Outside, the wind whispered through the trees, carrying the quiet sounds of the ranch. The horses shifted in their stalls, the fire crackled in the hearth, and the land stretched endlessly beneath the fading light. For the first time in a long while, the rancher felt a flicker of something he had not felt in years: hope. And for the woman, as she lay down on the bed, exhaustion finally catching up with her, there was a strange sense of safety. A feeling that maybe, just maybe, she had found a place where she could begin again. The road had been long and harsh, but here, on this scarred ranch, there was a chance to heal, to breathe, to survive. Neither of them knew what the future held, but for now, in that quiet house on the edge of the fields, they had found something precious. A beginning, fragile and small, yet full of promise. And as the night settled over the ranch, they each carried a private thought, unspoken but shared in the silence of the evening. The rancher, with his scars and quiet strength, had offered protection. The woman, weary and worn, had given him the first glimpse of her trust. And in that simple exchange, something profound had begun, something neither of them could have expected, but both would come to rely on in the days to come. The morning sun rose slowly over the ranch, painting the fields in golden light. The wind carried the fresh smell of earth and hay, and the distant mountains stood silent, watching over the land. The woman awoke to the sound of birds chirping and the soft creak of the old house settling in the quiet. She sat on the edge of the bed for a moment, taking a deep breath, feeling the warmth of the sunlight on her face. For the first time in a long while, she felt a sense of calm, though a faint unease lingered. She was still a stranger in this place, and she still carried the heavy memories of a past that refused to let go. Downstairs, the rancher was already awake. He had risen early, as he always did, to tend to the animals and the land. His movements were steady and precise, the result of years of routine and hard work. The barn smelled of straw and horses, familiar scents that reminded him of the life he had built for himself. He was alone most of the time, but that solitude had shaped him into someone who could face hardship without complaint. Still, there was something about her presence in the house that made the quiet feel different, softer, yet heavier with unspoken thoughts. By the time she came down, dressed in simple clothes that had been washed and dried overnight, he was brushing the horses in the barn. She watched him for a moment, noticing the scars along his arms and the careful way he handled the animals. There was strength in every movement, but also patience, a balance she had rarely seen in anyone before. She stepped forward quietly, careful not to startle him, and offered to help. At first he hesitated. "You don't have to," he said. But she smiled faintly, a gesture that seemed both fragile and determined. "I want to. I can help," she said softly. Reluctantly, he nodded. She approached the horse, a large chestnut mare with a gentle eye, and began brushing the coarse coat. Her hands moved slowly, carefully, almost reverently, and the horse seemed to sense her kindness, standing still and relaxed. The rancher watched her, noting the care in her touch. It was a small thing, but in her quiet determination, he saw a resilience that spoke louder than any words could. Over the next hours, they worked together in silence. She fed the animals, carried water, and helped repair a broken fence post that had been damaged during a recent storm. Each task required cooperation and attention, and slowly, the barriers between them began to soften. The rancher, who had spent so much of his life relying only on himself, found himself noticing her presence in ways he hadn't expected. There was a rhythm to their work, a silent communication, and a growing respect for one another. During a break, they sat together on a log near the barn, eating simple bread and cheese. The woman's hands shook slightly as she held her food, and the rancher slid a cup of water toward her without a word. She looked at him, surprised, and then nodded in gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered. He shrugged, not used to expressing much. "Everyone needs water," he said, his voice quiet but firm. There was a weight to his words, a reminder that in this place, survival depended on small acts of care. As the day went on, the woman began to talk more, though cautiously. She spoke of small, safe things, the weather, the animals, the rhythm of the land. Each word was measured as if she were testing the waters, feeling out whether this place and this man could be trusted. The rancher listened, offering small nods and simple replies, never pressing for more than she was willing to give. It was a slow dance of trust, each step tentative but meaningful. In the afternoon, a small incident brought them closer. One of the horses, startled by a loose board, bolted briefly, dragging its lead rope across the yard. The woman reacted quickly, moving to steady the animal, but her balance faltered and she nearly fell. The rancher was at her side in an instant, steadying her with strong hands. "You're okay," he said, his voice firm but calm. She nodded, catching her breath, and looked up at him with wide eyes. I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said, her voice shaking. "You didn't," he said, meeting her gaze steadily. "It happens. Just be careful next time." The moment was small, but it left an impression. She realized she could rely on him, and he realized he cared enough to act without hesitation. It was a trust born not from words but from action, a quiet understanding that they could face challenges together. Later that evening, as the sun dipped behind the mountains and the sky turned a deep shade of orange, they sat on the porch watching the horizon. The rancher had a quiet presence beside her, and she felt a sense of safety she had not known in years. She finally spoke of something more personal, though cautiously, about her past struggles, about the loneliness and fear she had carried for so long. Her voice was soft, almost hesitant, but the rancher listened, offering only a steady presence, no interruptions, no judgments. "I've been alone for a long time," she admitted, "and I didn't know where to go. I thought maybe I'd never be safe again." The rancher did not speak immediately. He understood more than she could know. He had lived with his own fears and solitude, and he recognized the courage it took for someone to reach out, even in small ways. Finally, he said, "You're safe here. For now, that's all that matters." She nodded, feeling the weight of her fears lift slightly. There was still uncertainty, but for the first time, she allowed herself to hope that someone could care without asking for anything in return. The rancher, for his part, felt something he had not felt in a long time, an unexpected connection. It was not love, not yet, but the quiet bond of trust forming between two people who had both known too much pain. Night fell over the ranch, and the stars appeared one by one in the clear sky. The wind whispered through the fields, carrying the scent of earth and distant trees. Inside, the house was warm with the fire's glow, a small refuge from the harshness of the world outside. She prepared for bed again, this time feeling slightly lighter, the burden of constant fear eased by the simple presence of someone who understood without needing explanations. The rancher paused at the doorway, watching her for a moment. He did not know what tomorrow would bring, or the days after that, but he knew one thing. For now she was safe, and that mattered more than anything. He turned away quietly, leaving her to rest, but the sense of connection lingered in the room, an invisible thread that neither of them could yet name. That night, sleep came easier than it had in months for the woman. She dreamed not of fear or running, but of wide fields, horses grazing, and a man who had shown her kindness without asking for anything in return. And for the rancher, in the quiet of his own room, the silence was no longer quite so heavy. There was a new presence in his life, fragile and hesitant but real. A beginning, small and careful yet promising, had begun on the scarred ranch. The next morning, the rhythm of the ranch continued. They rose early, fed the animals, and worked together, side by side. The woman's confidence grew with each passing hour. She learned the routines, remembered the animals' names, and began to anticipate the rancher's needs. He, in turn, started to show small signs of trust, letting her handle certain tasks alone, sharing small stories about the ranch, and even allowing a rare smile when she succeeded at something challenging. By the end of the week, the quiet bond between them had strengthened. She was no longer just a visitor. She had become part of the daily life of the ranch. And he had begun to understand that trust, once given, could be returned in ways neither of them expected. The past had left them both scarred, but together they were finding a way to move forward, one small, careful step at a time. The woman no longer felt the crushing weight of isolation. The rancher no longer felt the unbearable solitude of his scars. In the wide, open fields of the ranch, with the wind on their faces and the sun warming their backs, they had begun to discover something neither of them could have anticipated. The quiet, powerful beginnings of healing, born not from words but from trust, care, and the simple act of being present for one another. And as the sun set over the distant mountains once more, casting long shadows over the fields, both of them knew that life on the ranch would not be easy. There would be challenges, hardships, and moments that tested their patience and courage. But for the first time in a long while, they faced those challenges together, and that made all the difference. The days on the ranch had settled into a rhythm. The sun rose early, and the woman and the rancher moved through the routines of feeding animals, repairing fences, and caring for the land. Each day seemed quieter than the last, filled with the ordinary tasks that gave structure and purpose. Yet beneath the calm surface, shadows of the past quietly lingered, waiting for the moment they could be felt again. One afternoon, the woman was in the barn, brushing the horses, when she froze. A sound, faint but unmistakable, echoed from the distant road that led to the ranch. Her hands tightened on the brush and her heart beat faster. It was only a breeze, she told herself, only the creaking of the barn doors. But the memory of fear she had carried for so long, the fear of being found, the fear of being alone, rose sharply in her chest. She stepped back from the horse, eyes darting toward the window. The rancher noticed her hesitation. "What's wrong?" he asked, his voice steady but curious. She shook her head, forcing herself to relax. Nothing, just a sound, she said, though the unease in her voice betrayed her. He studied her face, recognizing the tension, the shadow of a past he knew she carried. He did not press further. Instead, he walked to her side and guided her gently back to the main area of the ranch. "You don't have to face everything at once," he said quietly. "We take it step by step." She nodded, grateful for his understanding. It was a simple gesture, but it reminded her that she was not alone here. And for someone who had been running from fear and uncertainty for years, that small reassurance meant everything. That evening, as they ate their simple dinner, her thoughts drifted to memories she had tried to leave behind. The streets she had fled from, the people who had caused her pain, and the losses she had endured. They all seemed to crowd into her mind, as though the quiet of the ranch had invited them back. She pushed the thoughts aside, focusing instead on the warmth of the fire and the presence of someone who had not asked for her past but had offered safety regardless. The rancher noticed her silence. "You've been quiet today," he said, "thinking about something." She hesitated, then slowly nodded. "Memories," she admitted. "Some are hard to forget." He did not respond immediately, letting her words hang in the air. Then he said softly, "We all have memories we'd rather not remember, but they don't have to control us. Not here." The reassurance was small, but it reached her in a way few words ever had. For the first time, she realized that maybe, on this ranch, she could start to let go of the fear that had followed her for so long. The next morning brought a test neither of them had anticipated. While checking the fence line, the rancher noticed a small group of strangers approaching from the distant road. They were far enough away that he could not make out their features clearly, but their presence immediately put him on alert. His hands rested on the fence post, steadying himself as he watched them draw closer. He could sense the woman behind him, quiet and tense, her posture rigid with anxiety. "They're coming closer," she whispered, her voice tight. The rancher nodded. "Stay here," he said, though he knew she would not remain idle if danger approached. "I'll handle it." He walked toward the road, moving with quiet authority. The strangers turned out to be travelers, lost and seeking directions. The tension eased, but the woman felt her heartbeat slow only gradually. It was a reminder that even in this quiet place, the world outside could still intrude. Later that week, another challenge arrived in a quieter, more personal form. While they were mending a fence in the fields, she stumbled and cut her hand on a sharp piece of wire. Blood welled immediately, and pain flared through her fingers. She tried to hide it, hoping not to alarm the rancher, but he saw her wince and rushed to her side. "Let me see," he said, gently taking her hand. The cut was deep enough that it required care, but nothing too serious. He cleaned it carefully, his hands steady and sure, while she watched him silently, impressed by his skill and patience. "Thank you," she said quietly once he had wrapped it with clean cloth. "You don't need to thank me," he replied. "It's just taking care of someone." It was in these small, shared moments, injuries tended, animals cared for, fences repaired, that their bond grew. Trust was no longer just a word. It was felt in action, in the way they relied on each other to move through the day safely and calmly. But the past had not finished testing her yet. One evening, as the woman walked near the edge of the property, she saw a figure in the distance, familiar and unsettling. Her heart stopped. It was someone from her past, someone she had hoped never to see again. Panic surged through her, a memory of fear that had been dormant returning with full force. She turned to run, but the rancher was already at her side, taking her arm gently to stop her. "Who is it?" he asked, noticing the tension in her body and the sudden pallor of her face. They know me," she whispered, her voice trembling. "From before, I can't go back there." The rancher's eyes narrowed slightly, a protective instinct taking over. "Then they won't come here," he said firmly. "Not while I'm here." She looked at him, startled by the intensity in his gaze. There was no anger, only determination, a promise that he would protect her no matter what. For the first time in a long while, she felt the true weight of safety, not just shelter, but someone willing to stand by her side against the shadows of her past. Over the next few days, they worked together to ensure the ranch was secure. The woman learned to trust not only in his strength, but in her own ability to face difficulties. She mended fences with care, learned how to feed the animals efficiently, and even began riding the horses, feeling the wind on her face and the power of the animals beneath her. Each day built her confidence, each small accomplishment lifting a layer of fear she had carried for years. The rancher, in turn, began to share more of himself. He told her stories of his past struggles on the ranch, the accidents he had survived, and the dangers he had faced alone. His scars were no longer just marks of survival, they were symbols of perseverance, of a life lived through hardship and strength. Listening to him, she realized that everyone carries wounds, visible or not, and that healing was possible even if it took time. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun dip behind the mountains. The sky was painted in shades of orange and pink, and the air was filled with the gentle sounds of the ranch settling into night. "I used to think I'd never feel safe again," she admitted quietly, her voice carried lightly by the evening breeze. "You're safe now," he said, his tone calm but unwavering. "You don't have to worry about the past here." She leaned back, letting the words sink in. For so long she had lived in fear, running from memories and people who had hurt her. Now, for the first time, she realized that she could breathe, that she could trust someone enough to let go of some of that fear. The rancher's presence, steady and strong, had become a foundation she could rely on. Night fell, and the stars appeared one by one, bright and steady over the wide-open fields. The woman felt a sense of peace she had not known in years, though she also knew that challenges would come again. The past might not be completely behind her, but here, on this ranch, she had a place to heal, a place where she could begin to face her fears and find strength she had forgotten she possessed. The rancher stayed nearby, his own thoughts reflecting on the changes he had seen in her. She was no longer the timid, fearful woman who had arrived weeks ago. She was growing stronger, more capable, and more determined. And in helping her, he had begun to feel something he had not allowed himself to feel in a long time: the quiet warmth of connection, the possibility that even someone with scars and solitude could find companionship and trust. By the time the moon rose over the mountains, casting silver light over the fields, both of them were settled in their routines and in the quiet trust they had built. There was still fear, still uncertainty, but there was also hope, and that hope was stronger than either had expected. They were no longer simply a man and a woman living on a ranch. They were partners in facing the world together, each providing strength the other needed to survive and heal. And in that quiet night, with the wind rustling the trees and the stars watching over them, the rancher and the woman understood something important. The past could not be erased, but it could be faced, shared, and survived. And together, they would face whatever came next, stronger for having found each other on a scarred but resilient piece of land. The days on the ranch had grown warmer, and the air carried the scent of fresh grass and the faint tang of animals. Life was quieter now, filled with steady work, the sound of horses grazing, and the gentle rhythm of the wind across the fields. Yet beneath the calm, both the rancher and the woman carried thoughts they had not yet shared, the kind of thoughts that had been buried under years of fear, solitude, and survival. It was during a late afternoon, with the sun low and golden, that the woman finally felt the courage to speak. They had finished repairing a fence together, their hands tired and rough from the work, and she sat down on a log to catch her breath. The rancher leaned against a nearby post, watching her with the same steady, quiet attention he always did. I want to tell you something," she began, her voice trembling slightly. She hesitated as if weighing each word carefully, then continued. Things from my past, things I've never told anyone. The rancher nodded, silently encouraging her to go on. He had learned that pushing someone to speak never worked. Trust had to be earned, and patience was essential. She took a deep breath and began slowly, describing the life she had before she arrived at the ranch. She spoke of loneliness, of people she had trusted who had betrayed her, and of the pain she had endured. Her voice shook at times, but she pressed on, her words tumbling out in a mixture of relief and fear. For the first time in years, she allowed herself to be fully honest, revealing the fears, regrets, and losses that had shaped her. The rancher listened without interruption, his eyes focused on hers, his hands resting on the fence post but ready to act if needed. He did not offer advice or judgment, only the steady presence she needed to face the memories she had carried alone for so long. With each word she seemed to grow lighter, as though unburdening herself of the weight she had carried for years. I thought I would never be safe," she admitted finally, tears gathering in her eyes. "I thought no one would ever care for me again." The rancher moved closer, placing a steady hand on her shoulder. "You're safe now," he said softly. "You don't have to carry that weight anymore. Not here." Her tears flowed freely, and she let herself lean into his presence, feeling a kind of comfort she had never known. For years she had hidden her pain, thinking it made her weak. But here, on the ranch, with someone who had chosen to protect her without question, she realized that sharing her pain did not make her weak, it made her human. After a long moment she wiped her eyes and looked at him, a small, hesitant smile forming. I trust you," she said quietly, the words almost a whisper. The rancher's expression softened, though he did not speak immediately. Trust was not something he took lightly, and hearing her say it carried a weight he understood deeply. He nodded slowly, acknowledging her words without needing to add more. The silence that followed was comfortable, filled with understanding rather than emptiness. Over the next days, their bond deepened further. They continued their work on the ranch, side by side, but now there was a new layer of connection beneath every action. She was no longer just helping with chores. She was a partner, a person whose presence mattered. And he was no longer just a protector. He was someone who could share his own past, his own scars, without fear of judgment. One evening, after a long day of work, they sat together on the porch, watching the sun sink behind the mountains. The sky was painted with shades of orange and purple, and the world felt calm and safe. The woman spoke of memories that were painful but necessary, sharing stories of hardship, loss, and moments when she had felt utterly alone. The rancher listened, offering small gestures of reassurance, a hand resting lightly on hers, a nod of understanding, a quiet murmur that he was there. In return, he began to share parts of his life he had never spoken aloud. He talked about the accidents and dangers he had faced on the ranch, about the fights that left scars on his body and heart, and about the years of solitude that had taught him to rely on no one but himself. His voice was calm, steady, and surprisingly gentle, and she listened with rapt attention, seeing in him a reflection of her own struggles and resilience. "I've carried a lot of pain alone," he admitted quietly. "I thought I could face everything by myself. But having you here, seeing you trust me, it changes things." She looked at him, eyes wide and earnest. "I know what you mean," she said. "I've always run from people, from memories, from the world. But here, I feel like I can finally breathe." The night settled over the ranch, cool and peaceful. The stars glittered above, and the gentle sound of the wind through the trees filled the quiet. They remained on the porch, talking and sharing until words became unnecessary. There was a profound understanding between them, an unspoken bond that went beyond explanation. Each had given the other a piece of themselves, the trust, the vulnerability, the willingness to be seen, and in doing so, they had created something rare and precious. In the days that followed, their routines continued, but now each task carried a new significance. Feeding the animals, repairing fences, and tending to the land were not just chores. They were opportunities to support each other, to strengthen the bond that had begun to form. The woman grew more confident with every day, her laughter returning in small, hesitant bursts, and the rancher found himself smiling more often, a warmth he had not felt in years filling the spaces of his solitude. One afternoon, they faced a small crisis when a storm rolled in unexpectedly. Dark clouds gathered over the ranch, and strong winds whipped through the fields. The animals grew restless, and the fence they had repaired only days before threatened to break under the force of the wind. Without hesitation, the woman and the rancher worked together, securing the animals and reinforcing the fences. They moved with a silent understanding, anticipating each other's actions and supporting one another without the need for words. After the storm passed, they stood together in the wet grass, breathing heavily but smiling at their accomplishment. It was a small victory, but it symbolized something greater, the realization that they could face challenges together, that their bond gave them strength neither had alone. As night fell once more, they sat by the fire, the warmth of the flames reflecting the growing closeness between them. The woman rested her head on her hands, looking into the fire, and spoke softly. "I never thought I would feel safe again. I never thought someone could care for me without expecting anything in return." The rancher nodded, his gaze steady on her. "Sometimes, the people who need it most are the ones who don't know how to ask for it," he said. "But you've given me something too, the trust to be there for someone again, and that's more than I expected." Tears welled in her eyes and she reached out to touch his hand. "I've given you all I had left," she whispered, a mixture of gratitude and vulnerability in her voice. He held her hand gently, understanding the weight of her words. "And I will honor it," he said quietly. "I promise." In that moment the fire crackled, and the ranch felt like more than just a home. It was a place of healing, a refuge where two people, each scarred by life, could find strength in one another. They were no longer simply a man and a woman sharing space. They were partners in trust, companions in resilience, and witnesses to each other's courage. The night deepened, and sleep began to draw them. But before they parted, there was a final, quiet exchange of understanding. Words were not needed. The presence of one another, the shared experience of vulnerability and trust, spoke louder than any sentence could. And as they lay down to rest, each reflected on how far they had come. The woman had faced the shadows of her past and found someone willing to share the burden. The rancher had opened his heart to trust and found someone worth protecting, worth believing in. Together, they had created a space where healing was possible, where scars, both visible and invisible, could exist without defining the person. For the first time, both of them realized that life did not have to be defined by fear or loneliness. They had begun to write a new story, one filled with trust, courage, and the quiet power of human connection. And though the future was uncertain, they knew that together, they could face whatever challenges came their way, drawing strength from the bond they had built and the trust they had given one another. The morning dawned with a gentle mist over the ranch, softening the edges of the fields and making the mountains in the distance look almost magical. The air was cool and fresh, carrying the scent of earth and grass. Life on the ranch had found a rhythm, one built on shared labor, mutual respect, and quiet understanding. But both the rancher and the woman knew that life was never entirely free of challenges. The past, with its memories and lingering shadows, could still reach out unexpectedly, testing the strength they had built together. That day began like any other, with the chores of feeding the animals and checking fences. The woman moved confidently, her hands steady and her eyes alert, a stark contrast to the timid, wary girl who had arrived weeks ago. The rancher watched her from across the yard, a faint smile on his lips. Her presence had changed the ranch, bringing warmth and life to a place that had once felt quiet and solitary. He too had changed. His patience, once practiced mostly for the animals, had learned a new depth for her. His heart, long guarded behind scars both physical and emotional, had softened, opening in ways he hadn't believed possible. As they worked, a sudden sound interrupted the peaceful morning. A shout came from the road, sharp and urgent, carrying across the fields. Both froze, ears straining. Then another shout, closer this time. It was someone from the town riding a horse and waving frantically. The rancher's brow furrowed. Trouble had arrived. The rider galloped into the yard, out of breath. The river's flooding. Houses downstream. People need help. You've got to come. The woman felt her stomach tighten. She knew that danger could not be ignored, and though the ranch was far from the river, it was their responsibility to help however they could. The rancher nodded, already assessing what needed to be done. "We'll take the wagon," he said. "You help the animals stay safe first. I'll get the supplies." Together they moved quickly. The woman guided the animals to a safe enclosure, speaking softly to calm them as they reacted nervously to the sounds of the approaching storm and flood warnings. She worked with precision and care, proving not only her reliability but also the courage that had grown within her since arriving at the ranch. The rancher returned with blankets, ropes, and food, organizing everything with efficiency born from years of preparation and survival. Then they set off toward the town, the wagon bumping along the dirt road as the wind picked up and dark clouds gathered overhead. The journey was tense, the sky darkening, rain beginning to fall in heavy sheets. Mud made the road slippery, and the horses strained against the load, but neither the rancher nor the woman faltered. Along the way, the woman noticed the worry in the rancher's eyes, a rare glimpse into the depth of his concern. It was not just for herself, but for the people who would be affected by the flood. And in that moment, she realized how much he had changed since she arrived at the ranch. He had always been strong and capable, but now there was also a warmth in his determination, a desire to protect not only himself and the ranch, but also others and her. When they reached the edge of the flooded river, the scene was chaotic. Water had risen swiftly, sweeping debris along its surface, threatening homes and livelihoods. People were trying to move to higher ground, carrying children, pets, and belongings, but the speed of the flood made progress slow and dangerous. The rancher and the woman did not hesitate. They leapt into action, helping those in immediate danger, guiding them to safety, and using the ropes and blankets to secure possessions and people alike. Amid the chaos, the woman noticed a young child trapped on a small piece of land surrounded by water. Without thinking, she ran forward, steadying herself on rocks and debris, and reached the child just as the water swirled dangerously around them. The rancher arrived moments later, taking the child carefully from her arms and setting them on safer ground. "You're brave," he said quietly, his voice carrying both pride and concern. She looked at him, wet and exhausted, but her eyes held a spark that had not been there before. "We have to help," she said simply. "We can't leave them." Their teamwork became seamless, a dance of experience, courage, and trust. Each action complemented the other. He steadied those in danger, while she guided them carefully. He organized supplies, while she reassured frightened people. Together they were a force, their bond strengthened by necessity and trust, proving that the partnership they had nurtured on the ranch could withstand anything. Hours passed, and finally the floodwaters began to recede. The people they had helped gathered on higher ground, exhausted but safe. Gratitude shone on their faces, and the woman and the rancher exchanged a quiet glance, a shared relief and satisfaction passing between them. They had faced something frightening and uncertain, and together they had emerged stronger. As they walked back to the ranch, the rain having stopped and the sky clearing, the woman felt a deep sense of accomplishment. She had faced fear, danger, and the echoes of her past all at once, and she had stood firm, supported by someone who believed in her and with whom she shared unspoken trust. Back at the ranch, they tended to the animals once more, ensuring they were fed and safe. The work was tiring, but neither of them complained. There was a sense of fulfillment in their shared labor, a quiet understanding that they were stronger together than they had ever been alone. That evening, after a simple dinner by the fire, they sat together on the porch. The sun dipped below the mountains, casting long shadows over the fields. The woman turned to the rancher, her eyes reflecting both exhaustion and a newfound confidence. "I never thought I could do something like today," she said softly. "I never thought I had this strength inside me." "You had it all along," he replied, his voice calm but filled with conviction. "You just needed the chance to see it." Her hand found his and she squeezed it gently. "And I couldn't have done it without you. You gave me more than shelter. You gave me hope." He looked at her, seeing not just the young woman who had arrived at his ranch weeks ago, but someone who had grown into her courage, her resilience, and her trust. "And you gave me something too," he said quietly. "You gave me the chance to care again, to trust again. That's more than I expected." The stars appeared one by one, twinkling above the ranch, and the wind carried the gentle scent of the earth after rain. They sat in silence, letting the moment sink in, both aware that they had reached a turning point. The hardships of the past had shaped them, but the experiences they had shared on the ranch, and the trust and care they had offered each other, had created a bond that could not easily be broken. Night fell fully, and the fire dwindled to embers. The woman stood and stretched, her body tired but her spirit alive with a sense of purpose and connection. "Tomorrow will be another day," she said, a small smile playing on her lips. "Yes," the rancher agreed, "and whatever comes, we'll face it together." In that quiet, simple moment, they both understood something profound. Life would always bring challenges, storms, floods, and memories of the past, but they had found something stronger than fear and loneliness. They had found trust, partnership, and a sense of hope that neither had thought possible. As the night deepened and the stars shone brightly over the ranch, the woman and the rancher prepared for sleep, knowing that tomorrow would bring new tasks, new challenges, and new moments to share. But for now there was peace, a rare and precious kind, born of trust, courage, and the connection they had built together. And as the ranch settled into the quiet of night, with animals resting safely in their stalls and the wind whispering through the fields, both of them carried a simple truth in their hearts. No matter what came next, they would face it side by side. The scars they bore, visible and invisible, did not define them. What mattered was the strength they had found in each other, the trust they had given, and the hope that had taken root in the heart of the scarred rancher and the woman who had given him all she had left. For the first time, they both realized that life could be more than survival. It could be shared courage, shared trust, and the quiet joy of knowing that someone else would always be there, no matter what. And in that shared understanding, they had everything they needed to face whatever came next together.